Dad's text read, "Cars outside." I dragged my suitcase to pick up Bay 3, the cool evening air thick with exhaust and stale coffee. By the open trunk, her hand, my father's new wife's, struck my cheek. A sharp, clean motion meant to seal a secret. I didn't scream. I just stared directly at the tiny lens I'd installed in the license plate frame last week. They chose the parking lot's shadows for their stage. I would bring the floodlights into their boardroom. My name is Sloan Mercer. I am 31 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've been living in a self-imposed exile disguised as a corporate transfer. They sent me to manage risk at a sleepy subsidiary in the mountains, a place where the biggest logistical crisis was a snowed-in access road. It was quiet, clean. It was supposed to make me forget the tangled, dirty machinery of Rivermark Freight's headquarters in Ashbourne, but now I had been summoned back. The prodigal daughter, recalled to the throne room not for a celebration, but for a task they called cleaning the books, a sterile, antiseptic term for what it really was: a hunt. My job was to find the rot that had set into the company's finances and cut it out before the board of directors did it for me, and for them. They thought bringing me back was a strategic move, leveraging my talent for untangling complex data trails. They believed 2 years in the quiet cold had softened my edges. They were wrong. The family I was returning to was a carefully constructed photograph. At the center was my father, Graham Mercer, the CEO of Rivermark Freight. He was a man who spoke in quarterly reports and measured affection in stock performance. He built an empire on the promise of reliability, of delivering anything, anywhere, on time. It was a promise he rarely kept in his personal life. Flanking him in the corporate photo was Vivian, his second wife, my stepmother. She held the title of honorary chair, a position with no real power but immense visibility. She was the company's public face, a master of the charity gala circuit, her smile as polished and impenetrable as the marble floors in the company lobby. She was the warm, maternal figure the press adored, the woman who had stepped in so gracefully after my mother's death. I was the inconvenient truth, the daughter from the first marriage, a constant, quiet reminder that the Mercer family portrait had been painted over an older, discarded canvas. The text arrived at precisely 6:03 p.m., just as I cleared the jet bridge and the recycled air of the terminal gave way to the damp evening chill of Ashbourne. It was from my father. Cars outside. Not "I'm outside" or "welcome home," just a logistical command. 4 words, efficient, impersonal. It was the language he understood best. I followed the signs for ground transportation, the wheels of my suitcase a rhythmic, hollow sound against the polished concrete. The air in the pickup area was a cocktail of diesel fumes, rain-dampened asphalt, and the faint, sad smell of lukewarm coffee from a nearby kiosk. It was the smell of arrivals and departures, of hurried greetings and final goodbyes. Under the sickly yellow glow of the sodium lamps, the black company sedan was waiting at Bay 3, sleek and silent as a shark. The driver, a man I vaguely recognized from years ago, stood by the rear of the car. He offered a tight, professional nod and moved to open the trunk. And then I saw her, Vivian. She emerged from the passenger side, a vision in a cream-colored cashmere coat, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, impervious to the evening damp. A smile bloomed on her face, the same one she used for the cover of Ashbourne Society magazine. It was wide, bright, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Sloan, darling," she purred, her voice a low, smooth melody. "We're so glad you're home." She closed the distance between us in 3 quick steps. The driver had the trunk open now, waiting for my luggage. I moved to lift my suitcase, and that's when it happened. Her smile didn't falter. Not for a second. Her hand, adorned with a simple but offensively large diamond, swung up and cracked across my left cheek. The sound was sharp, a dry, percussive slap that was swallowed almost immediately by the ambient noise of the airport. It wasn't a strike of passion or rage. It was precise, deliberate, and cold, a transaction, a message delivered with brutal efficiency. My head snapped to the side from the force of it. A sharp, metallic tang. The taste of blood from a bitten lip filled my mouth. The skin on my face burned. A sudden, blossoming heat that felt obscene in the cool night air. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't make a sound. My training, the discipline I had honed over years of navigating the treacherous currents of my family and my profession, took over. Emotion was a liability. Reaction was a concession of control. Instead, I let my right hand rest gently on the cool plastic handle of my suitcase, tilting my wrist just so. The tiny, almost invisible lens hidden in the third button of my coat now had a perfect, unobstructed view of my face, of the angry red mark already forming on my skin, and most importantly, of the faint, greasy smear of crimson lipstick her fingers had left behind. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the driver's gaze flick to the rearview mirror and then quickly away. His shoulders tense. He had seen it. He would say nothing. His paycheck was signed by Graham Mercer, not by a daughter who had just been assaulted by the CEO's wife. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look. I knew who it was from. Another 4-word command. Don't start. My father wasn't here, but he was watching, or at least, he was managing. He was containing the situation from a distance, as always. I turned my head slowly, meeting Vivian's gaze. Her eyes were placid, her smile still perfectly in place. She looked like a woman who had just inquired about the weather. "Is this the official welcome?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the cold fury coiling in my gut. Vivian leaned in closer, her expensive perfume, something with notes of jasmine and entitlement, clouding the air between us. Her smile tightened just a fraction at the corners. "In the office," she whispered, her voice a silken threat. "You keep your mouth shut. You do your little project. You sign your reports, and you go back to your mountains. Understand?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had already won. The tiny, wide-angle lens I'd installed in the car's license plate frame last week, citing a need for enhanced corporate vehicle security, would have captured her approach. Her posture, her words, the dashcam, a standard feature in all Rivermark vehicles, was voice-activated. The sharp crack of the slap would have triggered its audio recording, capturing her whispered threat as clear as a bell. 2 cameras, 2 audio sources, all time-stamped, all geotagged. Corroboration. I slid my phone from my pocket, my movements calm and deliberate. I opened a new message, typed a single word, and sent it to my own number. Received? It wasn't a note to self. It was a trigger, miles away. A small script I had written, running on a private server, sprang to life. It would now access the cloud storage linked to the car's security cameras, pull the video and audio files from the last 5 minutes, compress them into an encrypted package, and upload them to 3 separate, geographically diverse offline storage vaults. The process was automated, silent, and irreversible. The evidence was already safe. Vivian watched me, her eyes narrowing slightly, mistaking my action for a retreat, a message to a friend, a moment of weakness. She believed she had established the new world order. She thought she had put me in my place. I met her gaze one last time, then turned and lifted my suitcase into the trunk myself. The driver moved to help, a moment too late, and I waved him off. The trunk lid closed with a soft, hydraulic hiss, sealing the moment. The opening act of this homecoming drama was complete. I walked to the rear passenger door and got in, the leather of the seat cool against my clothes. Vivian slid in on the other side. The driver shut the trunk and returned to his seat, his eyes fixed firmly forward. The engine purred to life, and the sedan pulled away from the curb, melting into the stream of traffic leaving the airport. We drove in silence, the city of Ashbourne rising up to meet us, its glittering towers like shards of glass against the darkening sky. Vivian stared out her window, a portrait of serene composure. I stared out mine, my reflection a pale ghost against the passing lights. On my cheek, the fire of her handprint had cooled to a dull, persistent ache. It wasn't an injury. It was a promise, a down payment, and I was already calculating the interest. The drive from the airport to the corporate apartment they'd arranged for me was a silent masterclass in denial. Vivian scrolled through her phone, the screen's glow casting her in a pale, angelic light, while I watched the familiar, rain-slicked streets of Ashbourne slide by. To any outside observer, we were simply two family members, tired after a long day, but the throbbing heat on my cheek was a secret language between us, a conversation held in the brutal vocabulary of violence. It was a language my family had perfected, the art of the pristine surface, the polished facade that concealed the rot festering just beneath. If you were to pick up the latest issue of Ashbourne Business Monthly, you'd find us smiling on page 12. It's a full-page spread, a piece of corporate propaganda masquerading as journalism. The headline reads, "The Mercer Family, a commitment to community." In the photo, my father, Graham Mercer, stands in the center, his hand resting on Vivian's shoulder. He looks every bit the benevolent captain of industry, his expression a carefully calibrated mix of authority and warmth. Vivian is radiant, her smile suggesting a life dedicated to charity luncheons and philanthropic endeavors. They look solid, dependable, a dynasty built not just on freight logistics, but on civic virtue. I'm not in the picture. For the past 2 years, I've been the inconvenient footnote in the Mercer family story, the chief risk officer whose primary risk was being too close to the truth. So they sent me to the mountains, to a branch office where the biggest danger was a paper jam. They gave me a title and an office with a view of pine trees, and they hoped I would fade into the scenery. Vivian arrived like a weather front a year after my mother's funeral. My father, a man who loathed the vacuum of grief, saw her as a solution. She was beautiful, poised, and unburdened by a past that connected to ours. She seamlessly filled the empty spaces in my father's life and, more importantly, in the company's public narrative. Within 6 months, she was the honorary chair of the Mercer Foundation. Soon after, she was a regular guest on local morning talk shows, discussing her passion for empowering women in business. I once watched, from my sterile apartment 100 miles away, as she spoke with teary-eyed conviction about the importance of mentorship and lifting up other women. She spoke of breaking glass ceilings, all while methodically cementing the one she had installed over my mother's memory. And right above my head, she was a brilliant actress, and Ashbourne was her captive audience. My father, in turn, sold the world a story of Rivermark Freight as a meritocracy, a place of boundless opportunity. "We give people a chance," he'd say in interviews, his voice resonating with sincerity. The internal numbers, the ones I was paid to analyze, told a different story. They spoke of wage stagnation in the lower ranks, of promotion tracks that mysteriously favored a certain demographic, of a gender pay gap that widened the higher you climbed the corporate ladder. The opportunity for all was a carefully marketed fiction, a product more valuable than any cargo we shipped. My exile was meant to be permanent, but I'm not good at being idle, and the mountain air, while clean, was boring. So I kept digging. I maintained my old system access, citing the need for enterprise-wide risk modeling. Late at night, with the lonely sound of wind in the pines outside my window, I would wander through the digital corridors of Rivermark's financial servers, and that's where I found it. A ghost in the machine, a series of transactions, labeled as grants for community development, all funneled to a single entity. Cinderline Outreach. The payments were substantial, recurring, but Cinderline itself had the digital footprint of a phantom. No website, no public records beyond a shell corporation registered to a P.O. box. The money went in, and then it simply vanished. But money never vanishes. It just changes shape. I traced the outgoing funds from Rivermark, and while I couldn't see where they went after Cinderline, I started to notice a pattern. Following each major grant payment, smaller, seemingly unrelated invoices would appear from new vendors, consultants who specialized in political lobbying and public relations. The money was being laundered, taken out under the guise of charity and brought back in as a business expense, funding the very campaigns that polished the Mercer family halo. The timing of the media blitz was no coincidence. As the end of the fiscal year approached, and with it, the annual audit, the puff pieces about the model family began appearing with startling frequency. We were on magazine covers, in newspaper supplements, our name attached to every charity 5K and hospital wing dedication. It was a preemptive strike, building a wall of public goodwill so high that no auditor would dare to look over it. It was a masterful campaign, and I had no doubt Vivian was the architect. My summons back to Ashbourne wasn't my father's idea. He would have preferred I stayed in the mountains, a distant problem he could ignore. It came from the board, an anonymous member. The email from the chairman's office had cryptically stated, had raised concerns about financial transparency in our philanthropic endeavors. They were launching an independent, internal review, and they wanted me to lead it. Me, the daughter in exile, the risk officer who had been sent away. Someone on the board knew I had the skills, and more importantly, they must have suspected I had the motivation to find what was hidden. My father and Vivian couldn't refuse the board's request without raising suspicion, so they had to bring me home, back into the heart of the machine. They had to pretend it was what they'd wanted all along. Vivian's name was the specter haunting the Cinderline files. While the final grant approvals often bore my father's digital signature, the preliminary authorizations, the internal memos that greenlit the initial review of these grants, were all stamped with her initials, V.M. She was the gatekeeper. She was the one who selected these phantom charities and pushed them onto my father's desk for the final, rubber-stamped signature. My early discreet inquiries from the mountains had clearly triggered an alarm. My return wasn't a homecoming. It was a threat. She needed to know if I was coming back as an auditor or as a daughter. She needed to know if I could be controlled. And that's what the slap was. It wasn't about anger or losing her temper. Vivian never lost her temper. She deployed it. The slap was a test, a cold, calculated probe to gauge my reaction. If I cried, if I screamed, if I made a scene, I would be the unstable, emotional daughter, a hysterical woman whose professional judgment couldn't be trusted. My credibility would be shot before I even set foot in the office. They would paint me as a troubled soul, lashing out at the kind, patient woman who had tried so hard to be a mother to me. But if I took it, if I stood there and absorbed the blow without a word, it would signal something else. It would signal that I understood the rules, that I was willing to play the game, to accept the pain in exchange for a seat at the table. It was a test of compliance. She had made a critical miscalculation. She assumed my silence was submission. She couldn't conceive of a third option, that my silence was a weapon, that it was the sound of a trap being set. As the sedan sped toward the city, Vivian thought she had won the opening skirmish, that she had successfully intimidated me into silence. She had no idea that I wasn't just planning to talk. I was planning to make the entire company listen. She wanted to keep things in the family. I was about to make it a matter for the shareholders. The perfect family facade had just developed a crack, and I was going to shatter it into 1,000,000 pieces. The corporate apartment was a sterile white box on the 19th floor, smelling faintly of new carpet and industrial cleaner. I slept for 3 hours, a shallow, dreamless sleep, and woke before the sun. The mark on my cheek had faded from a fiery red to a dull, mottled purple, a bruise that felt more like a brand. I covered it with concealer, the makeup feeling like plaster over a crack. By 7 a.m., I was in the lobby of the Rivermark Tower, my corporate ID, which they'd forgotten to deactivate during my exile, still granting me access. I bypassed my old office on the 18th floor. It was a space for managing known risks. This required something different. I took the elevator to the 27th floor, the executive wing. It was silent, a tomb of brushed steel and dark mahogany. I found the conference room I wanted, the one at the end of the hall, the one with the floor-to-ceiling glass walls that overlooked the Pilgrim River. It was a fishbowl, a place designed for presentations, for transparency. I set my laptop on the long, polished table and plugged into the network port. I was a ghost in their machine, and I was about to start haunting. My board-mandated access was a digital skeleton key. I didn't bother with the glossy front-end financial dashboards my father and Vivian favored, the ones with the cheerful pie charts and upward-trending graphs. I went straight to the raw data, the subledgers, specifically, the Community Development and Outreach Ledger. For 2 years, from my mountain outpost, I had only been able to see the surface. Now, I was deep inside the engine. The numbers didn't lie. They just whispered. I ran a query for all transactions routed to the shell company I'd flagged. Cinderline Outreach. The list populated the screen. It wasn't 1 or 2. It was 14. 14 separate transactions over the last 18 months. Each one coded as Community Development Grant. Each one just under the $500,000 threshold that would trigger an automatic secondary review. The total was just shy of $7 million. This was the first layer. The money went out, but the crucial part of any round-trip scheme is the return. I opened a separate query, this one for the accounts payable vendor logs. I cross-referenced the dates of the Cinderline payments with new vendor invoices. A pattern emerged, clear and damning. Within 48 hours of every grant paid to Cinderline, a new invoice would be submitted by one of 3 companies I'd never heard of. Pilgrim Strategies, Ashbourne Consulting Group, or Riverway Public Relations. These invoices were for strategic consulting or government lobbying fees. The money went out as tax-deductible charity and returned, washed clean, as a business expense. They were using the company's philanthropic arm to fund their political and social ambitions, burying the cost deep in the operational budget. But how? A $7 million fraud required high-level approval. I pulled the digital authorization logs for all 14 Cinderline transfers. My father's signature, G. Mercer, was nowhere to be found. Instead, each one was stamped, V.M., Vivian Mercer. My blood ran cold. Vivian was an honorary chair. She had no operational authority. She couldn't sign a requisition for office supplies, let alone a multi-million-dollar wire transfer. I dug into the corporate governance matrix, the delegation of authority files, and there it was, a temporary addendum, added 20 months ago. In the CEO's absence from headquarters, VEM, Mercer is authorized to approve financial commitments on his behalf. It was a loophole, designed to let her sign for catering at a charity dinner if he was traveling. She had driven a freight train through it. I looked closer at the lobbying invoices, the return part of the scheme. The PEO numbers looked legitimate, formatted correctly. I pulled the master vendor list. Pilgrim Strategies wasn't on it. Neither were the other 2. They were ghost vendors. I compared the PEO for Pilgrim Strategies with a legitimate one from the same week. Legitimate, PO 903, T4 Kilo. Fraudulent, PO 903 Tiakamaj. T4 Lilo. A single character, K, changed to L. A simple, arrogant trick. The accounts payable clerk, drowning in invoices, would just glance at the prefix, see that it matched the approved format, and process the payment. This wasn't a sophisticated hack. This was brute force arrogance, an inside job that relied on people being too busy, too lazy, or too intimidated to look closely. But the final piece was the CEO's absence. Vivian's power was conditional. I opened my father's official corporate calendar and cross-referenced the 14 dates of the VM approvals. My stomach tightened. On every single one of those days, Graham Mercer's calendar was wiped clean. Not out of office, Beijing, or on vacation, just blank. A CEO's calendar is never blank. It's a minute-by-minute schematic of his life. White space like that didn't just happen. It had to be created. I ran a check on the server's edit logs, and there it was. On the day before each transfer, an entry was manually deleted. Meeting, State Senator Greaves. Lunch, Port Authority Commissioner, all of them deleted, usually by his executive assistant. creating an official digital absence that armed Vivian's signature. He wasn't just negligent, he was complicit. He was providing the alibi, turning his back so she could sign the checks, allowing them both to maintain plausible deniability. "Don't start." He had texted me. He wasn't telling me not to fight with my stepmother. He was telling me not to pull this thread. I began to compile a report. This wouldn't be a quiet audit. This would be an indictment. I created a new encrypted file on my local drive. I needed a code name, something to shield it from network sniffers. I looked down at my hand, at the faint purple mark on my cheek. I typed the file name. Trunk. It was a reminder of the airport, of the sound of her hand, of the cold. Precise threat. It was the name of the case file. I laid out the data. The 14 Cinderline transfers, the VM signature, the illegal authorization, the ghost POS, and the blank calendar entries with their corresponding deletion logs. I packaged it, a concise, 10-page memo, all data, no emotion. I sent it through the board's secure, anonymous reporting portal, flagging it for the immediate attention of the audit committee chair. The first shot was fired. Now, security, I couldn't leave this data on the Rivermark network. Not even on my laptop. They could wipe it remotely, claim I was a disgruntled employee fabricating evidence. I spent the next hour building a digital fortress. First, I partitioned a section of an old, decommissioned server in the building's sub-basement, a server so old no one monitored it. I built a 2-layer encrypted vault, requiring a physical hardware key, which I now wore on a chain under my shirt, and a 64-character passphrase. That was my working copy. The second copy was for insurance. I downloaded the entire trunk package, the memo, the raw ledgers, the PTO, files, and pivotally, the encrypted video and audio files from the airport pickup, onto a new, bank-grade encrypted SSD. This was my offline vault. This was the copy they couldn't touch. After work, I would take it to a safe deposit box at Westbridge National Bank, across the river, a bank no one in my family had ever used. I was logging out, my fingers aching from typing, when my personal phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a message on Signal, the encrypted app, an unknown number. The message was short, and it stopped my heart. "I know what you're looking for. Cinderline, they forced me out last year for asking the same questions. We need to talk. Elise Rowe." Elise Rowe. She had been the chief accountant, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman who had worked for my father for 20 years. Then, suddenly, she was gone. The internal memo cited early retirement to spend time with her family. She was 48. She was a potential ally. No, she was a critical witness, an insider who had seen the machine from the inside and been crushed by it. I couldn't respond on Signal. It was too insecure if her phone was compromised. I needed a channel that looked like work. I logged into the corporate Slack. I created a new, private channel. I gave it the most mind-numbingly boring name I could think of. Something no IT auditor, scanning for keywords like fraud or Vivian, would ever click on. Q3 Lane Reconciliation. It sounded like an accountant's nightmare. It was perfect. I invited Elise Rowe's dormant Slack account, hoping she still had access or notifications forwarded to her email. In the glass-walled room on the 27th floor, I sat back. The sun was high now, glinting off the cold water of the Pilgrim River far below. I was exposed, in a room made of windows. But for the first time in years, I was the one looking out, not the one being watched. The summons came via text message in the late afternoon. After my first day of digging, it was from Vivian. "Sloan, darling, I feel we got off on the wrong foot last night. The stress of your return, it was unbecoming of me. Please let me take you to a proper dinner tonight. The Fig Lantern at 8. Women in this business must support one another." The hypocrisy was so potent it was almost dizzying. Unbecoming of me, as if she'd used the wrong fork, not assaulted me. Women must support one another. The words hung in the air. A grotesque parody of the mentorship she preached on local television. She wasn't offering an apology. She was changing the battlefield. The airport pickup bay was a brawl. The fig lantern was a duel, and she was choosing the weapons: expensive wine, curated ambiance, and plausible deniability. Refusing would be an admission of fear. "I'd be delighted," I texted back. The fig lantern was a cathedral of manufactured intimacy. Dark wood, leather banquettes so deep you sank into them, and single, precisely aimed spotlights that illuminated each table like a miniature stage. It smelled of old money and truffle oil. Vivian was already there, seated in a prime corner booth, a glass of pale Sancerre already in her hand. She looked magnificent, composed, warm, her face a mask of serene welcome. The bruise on my cheek, now a sickly yellow-green, was invisible under a layer of professional-grade concealer. "Sloane," she smiled, rising slightly to air-kiss the space beside my head. "I'm so glad you came. You look tired. Poor thing, the mountain air must have made you soft." The waiter, who clearly knew her, glided over. I ordered a sparkling water. Vivian's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. My sobriety was a small, petty act of defiance. "I must admit," she began, leaning forward, her voice a confidential murmur. "I was hurt when I heard the board was bringing you in. It felt like a betrayal, as if Graham and I weren't managing things perfectly well." "It's not a betrayal, Vivian," I said, my voice flat, holding her gaze. "It's an audit. Standard governance." Of course, you're so wonderfully technical," she said. "But we're family. Sloane, these governance issues, they can be so disruptive. They upset the balance." She then launched into the performance. It was her signature piece, the one she used for magazine interviews and charity galas. The Ballad of Vivian, the self-made woman. She spoke of her difficult childhood, a vague, romanticized poverty that never involved actual hunger, but always involved resilience. She spoke of being an orphan in a world of privilege, of fighting for every scrap. "You see, Sloane," she said, her perfectly manicured hands cradling her wineglass, "when you come from nothing, absolutely nothing, you learn to protect what you build. You build walls, not to keep people out, but to protect what's inside." Her hands were astonishingly steady. There was no tremor, no flicker of memory from the previous night. She was recounting her fictional trauma, her eyes bright with unshed, unfelt tears, and her pulse was probably resting at a placid 60. She was telling me she was a survivor, a fighter. She was warning me that she would protect her territory, my father's company, my father's money, from me, the spoiled, privileged daughter. The waiter brought my water. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting her performance settle in the air. Then, I leaned in, mirroring her confidential tone. "Speaking of protecting things," I said, keeping my voice light, "I was in the system today, just getting my bearings. I kept seeing a name pop up in the outreach ledgers, Cinderline Outreach. It seems to be a significant recipient of the Foundation's grants, but I couldn't find any public filings for it. I was just curious." She didn't flinch. She laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was a sharp, brittle sound, like glass shattering in another room. "Oh, that," she said, waving a dismissive hand, the diamond on her finger catching the light. "My goodness, you really are a little bloodhound, aren't you?" She took a delicate sip of her Sancerre. "It's a simple accounting misunderstanding. Darling, a passion project of mine. Graham lets me handle some of the smaller community portfolios, and you know how the paperwork can get tangled. It's all being sorted out by the end of the quarter." A misunderstanding. $7 million, 14 transactions, ghost PO us, a blank CEO calendar, all dismissed as tangled paperwork. It was a magnificent, audacious lie, delivered with the casual ease of someone ordering dessert. She was telling me she knew I was looking, and she was telling me to stop. She thought she had just ended the conversation. She thought she had established the boundary. But in her confidence, she made a mistake. Her phone, which she'd placed face up on the white tablecloth, a subtle power move, showing she was too important to be disconnected, vibrated. The screen illuminated for 2 seconds, just long enough for me to read the lock screen notification. It was an email. The sender was Jonathan Cade, our general counsel, but it was the attachment name that made my blood freeze. Board Packet V3 Draft. I had designed the corporate file naming conventions myself. That file name wasn't just a random attachment. It was the internal, confidential draft of the very presentation being prepared for the board about my audit. She wasn't just aware of the investigation. She was actively managing the response to it alongside the company's chief lawyer. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was a cover-up. The waiter returned, a silent shadow. "Will there be anything else, Mrs. Mercer?" "Just the check, thank you, Daniel," Vivian said, smiling her gracious public smile. And then, the tell. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible detail. The waiter was still at the table, his hand just moving to retrieve her empty glass. When Vivian lifted her water goblet, took a small sip, and set it down. Tap, a single, sharp, definitive sound on the heavy oak table. It wasn't a clink, it was a full stop. It was the sound a CEO makes when the meeting is over. The sound of a pen hitting a desk after signing a command. It was the habit of someone who doesn't wait to be dismissed, but who does the dismissing. She had done it before the check had even been printed. The transaction was over. I was dismissed. This was my cue. I gathered my purse, feigning a slight awkwardness, the dutiful stepdaughter playing her part. "Thank you for dinner, Vivian. It was illuminating." I slid out of the deep banquette. As I did, my hand came out of my coat pocket, and with it, a slim blade-style USB drive. It was black, thin as a credit card, and I let it slip from my fingers. It didn't clatter. It made a soft, muffled sound as it landed on the dark leather upholstery beside her. A perfect, calculated accident. I took 2 steps away from the table, then stopped, patting my pockets in mock panic. "Oh, no, I think my keys." I turned back, but Vivian was faster. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, had already spotted it. She plucked the drive from the seat before I could even pretend to look for it. She held it up, dangling it between her thumb and forefinger. Her eyes weren't warm now. They were cold, analytical, and triumphant. She didn't ask, "Is this yours?" "You're careless, Sloane," she said, and her voice was a silken purr. She saw the auditor, the one digging into Cinderline, dropping a USB drive after being explicitly warned off. In her mind, this was it. This was my data, my leverage, my copy of the evidence. She smiled, a small, tight smile of victory. "I'll hold on to this for you. We wouldn't want you to lose it." She dropped it into her small, ridiculously expensive Bottega clutch and snapped it shut. The click was as definitive as the tap of her glass. "Thank you," I said, my voice just breathy enough to sound flustered. Thank you, Vivian." She nodded, the benevolent queen, and I walked away. I walked through the hushed restaurant, past the bar, and out into the cold night air. The valet rushed for her car. I declined a cab. "I'll walk," I said. "I need the air." From the shadows of the building's portico, I watched. Vivian emerged, got into the back of her waiting sedan. She didn't wait for the car to pull away. Through the window, I saw the interior light click on. She had her clutch open, the USB drive in her hand. She couldn't wait to see what she'd captured. I knew exactly what she would find. It wasn't the trunk file. It wasn't the ledgers, the POS, or the audio files from the airport. It was a single, high-resolution 12-megabyte JPEG image. It was a photo taken from the camera I'd installed in the license plate frame. Aimed up, it was a crystal-clear shot of the trunk, the bumper, and the parking bay, and burned into the metadata, as well as visually stamped in the bottom right corner, was the time and date, 6:04:12 p.m., the exact second her hand had connected with my face. It wasn't an accusation, it was a receipt, a digital confirmation. I know you think you're holding my evidence. You're wrong. I'm holding yours. As I watched, her shadow in the back of the car stiffened. She had seen it. She now understood the bait. I saw her snatch up her phone. Her thumb moved in a blur. I was already walking away. But I turned my head just enough to see her screen, angled toward the window. She was sending a text. The recipient at the top of the screen was not my father. It was J. Cade, Jonathan Cade, the General Counsel. The message she typed, furiously, was short, but it told me everything. "We're fine. She's bluffing. I have the package. The girl is handled." She was wrong on all counts, and she had just confirmed my next target. She wasn't just using my father's money. She was using his lawyer. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a corporate conspiracy. And they had just invited me to the party. The invitation to the Q3 Lane Reconciliation Slack channel was accepted within 10 minutes. A single message from Elise Rowe appeared. "Warehouse 7, Old Waterfront District, 10 p.m. Come alone." Warehouse 7 was a relic, a corrugated steel carcass from a time when Rivermark Freight still moved physical goods on the Pilgrim River. Now it was a long-term storage facility, a dumping ground for obsolete hardware and forgotten files. The air inside was cold, still, and heavy with the scent of dust and decaying paper. A single string of bare bulbs cast long, distorted shadows across rows of metal shelving. Elise Rowe was waiting in the center of the main aisle, a small, bird-like woman swallowed by an oversized parka. Her face, which I remembered as sharp and animated, was now etched with a deep, weary caution. Her eyes darted toward the warehouse door as I shut it behind me, the heavy thump echoing in the cavernous space. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice a low murmur that the vast room seemed to drink. "I wasn't sure you would." "You took a bigger risk reaching out," I replied. "They don't just fire people who ask questions, do they, Elise? They buy their silence." A flicker of something, shame, maybe, or just the memory of fear, crossed her face. "They do." She hugged herself, her breath misting in the cold air. "I took the money. Sloan, a generous severance package, they called it. Enough to make you feel like a winner, right up until you realize you've just sold your own conscience." She led me deeper into the warehouse, our footsteps the only sound. We stopped at a row of gray-dented filing cabinets. She pulled a key from her pocket and unlocked one. It wasn't full of files. It was full of old, leather-bound logbooks. She retrieved one, its dark blue cover faded and worn. When Vivian started her philanthropic work, she wanted a separate ledger, a passion project. She called it, "I managed it," Elise said, her voice hardening. When I started seeing the patterns, the money going out to Cinderline, the lobbying invoices coming back in, I raised a red flag, quietly, "Just to your father." "What did he do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He told me I was misinterpreting the data, that Vivian's work was complex and I should focus on my own department." 2 weeks later, Jonathan Cade from legal called me in. He had my termination papers ready. He said they wanted to avoid any unpleasantness. He told me to delete the digital ledger for the project. "Housekeeping," he called it. She tapped the cover of the book she was holding. They watched me drag the file to the trash on my desktop. They were very thorough, but they didn't know about this, the original paper draft. She opened the logbook on top of a dusty crate. The pages were filled with her neat, precise handwriting. It was a meticulous record of every proposed transaction for a new fund, one that had never been publicly announced, the Rivermark Women Forward Initiative. It was supposed to be Vivian's flagship project. "It was a ghost fund," Elise explained, her finger tracing a line item. "The seed money was supposed to come from an anonymous donation, but look," she pointed to an entry, "initial funding source, Cinderline Outreach, $2 million. My breath caught. They were using the laundered money to start a new fund? "Worse," she said, flipping a page. "They weren't funding grants with it. The proposal was to use the $2 million to purchase a controlling interest in a newly formed SPV, a special purpose vehicle, a separate legal entity, a corporate shell designed to isolate financial risk, a perfect place to hide assets. What was the SPV's name? I asked, my voice tight. Elise looked me straight in the eye. Its official registered name was Pilgrim Family Line Trust. The name was a punch to the gut. It was a name my mother had come up with years ago for a small family savings account, a name that evoked heritage, legacy, continuity, a name Vivian had stolen and twisted into a tool for her own greed. And the beneficiary? I asked, the word tasting like ash. Elise didn't need to answer. She just nodded slowly. Vivian. It wasn't just about hiding political spending anymore. This was the endgame. She was siphoning millions of dollars from the company under the guise of charity, washing it through Cinderline, and then using it to buy assets that she would personally own, all under the stolen legacy of my mother's family name. It was an act of theft so profound, so personal. It transcended business. This was desecration. I took the money. Sloan, Elise said again, her voice cracking. I have a son in college, a mortgage. I was scared, but seeing you come back, hearing that the board was starting a review, I couldn't live with it anymore. This is everything I have. It's enough, I said, my voice colder than the air in the warehouse. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a pen. It was a simple, elegant fountain pen. I clicked the top. A tiny, nearly invisible blue light blinked once, then went dark. The high-definition video and audio recording had begun. Elise, I said calmly, for the record, are you providing this information and this logbook to me willingly, as part of an official internal audit for Rivermark Freight? Her eyes widened for a second as she understood what I was doing. Then, a look of resolve settled on her face. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, I am. For the next hour, we worked. Elise, finally unburdened, was a torrent of information. We took photos of every page of the logbook. We went back to the issue of Vivian's digital signature. I never understood how she did it, Elise said, poring over a printout of the transaction logs I'd brought. On at least 5 of these Cinderline transfers, Vivian was out of the country with your father. I checked her social media, the company travel logs. She was in London for 2 of them, Zurich for another. But the digital signature was initiated from an IP address here, at headquarters, I said, thinking aloud. Elise's eyes lit up with dawning horror. Her token, she whispered. Every senior officer has a physical USB token for signing off on major transfers. It's 2-factor authentication. She must have left her token here. Someone else signed for her, using her credentials, while your father created the absence in his calendar. It was a conspiracy that required at least 3 people. Vivian, the architect, my father, the enabler, and a 3rd person on the inside. The one with physical access to Vivian's office and her security token. The one who actually pushed the button. Before I left the warehouse, I did one last thing. I logged into the Rivermark network on my phone through a secure VPN. I navigated to the directory where the trunk file and all its supporting evidence were stored in my encrypted vault. I couldn't let them know I had the original paper ledger from Elise yet. I needed them to think they were chasing the digital trail. I needed to see who would flinch first. I wrote a simple script, a digital tripwire. I attached a tag to every single file in the vault. The tag was invisible, buried in the metadata. I called it Needle. It had one function. If any of the tagged files were opened, moved, copied, or even accessed by any user, the system would immediately send a silent, high-priority alert to my encrypted email. It wouldn't block the access. It would just tell me it had happened. I was leaving a breadcrumb trail back to myself, and I was going to see which wolf would take the bait. Go home, Elise, I said, putting the pen back in my pocket. Delete my number. Delete the Slack channel. If anyone contacts you, you don't know me. You haven't spoken to me. Not until I call you. She nodded, looking smaller and more fragile than ever. but with a spark of defiance in her eyes I hadn't seen before. I drove back to my apartment, the city lights smearing across my windshield. The weight of the logbook in my briefcase felt immense. It was the proof. It was the motive. It was the weapon. I sat in my dark apartment for hours, watching the city below, my mind racing through the permutations of the conspiracy. At 11:42 p.m., my phone chimed softly. A single, discreet notification. It was the alert. Subject: System security. Ping. Needle triggered. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the email. The message was brutally simple. A line of unadorned system text. File accessed. Vault 7. Trunk memo final. Das Yex. Timestamp 23:42:17 EST user ID G. Mercer admin. G. Mercer admin. Graham Mercer, my father. He wasn't just enabling Vivian. He wasn't just looking the other way. He had seen my report to the board, and now, late on a Tuesday night, from his administrator account with the highest level of privilege, he was in my vault. He was hunting for what I knew. The trap had been sprung, and the first person caught in its teeth was my own father. The email arrived at 6 a.m. It was from my father's executive assistant. An urgent, mandatory meeting of the senior leadership team had been called for 9 a.m. The subject: clarification of philanthropic account discrepancies. They hadn't even waited 24 hours. My father's late-night visit to my encrypted files had confirmed his worst fears, and now he was moving to cauterize the wound. This wasn't a meeting for clarification. It was a show trial. My show trial. They were going to discredit me, paint me as incompetent or malicious, and bury my findings under a mountain of corporate jargon and legal maneuvering. They thought because they had found my digital trail, they knew the whole story. They thought they were setting a trap for me. They had no idea they were walking into mine. I entered the 27th floor boardroom at 8:58 a.m. It was the same glass-walled room where I had begun my work, but now it was filled with the heavyweights of Rivermark freight. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table, looking stern and presidential. To his right, Jonathan Cade, the general counsel, was arranging a stack of files with practiced precision, and to my father's left, in the seat of honor, was Vivian. She was a masterpiece of corporate armor. She wore a simple navy blue dress, accented by a single strand of pearls. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon. Her face was a mask of calm. Concerned leadership. She was the picture of a woman wronged, a community leader whose noble efforts were being questioned by a jealous stepdaughter. She met my gaze as I entered and gave me a small, sad smile that was meant to convey pity. It was a magnificent performance. I took my seat opposite them, placing my laptop on the table. The other vice presidents, a collection of gray-suited men who owed their careers to my father, avoided my eyes, shuffling papers and studying the view of the Pilgrim River with intense interest. They were the jury, and they had already been given their verdict. My father began, his voice a low rumble of authority that had silenced boardrooms for 3 decades. We're here to address a sensitive issue. An internal report, compiled by Sloan, has raised questions about the allocation of funds within our foundation. These are serious allegations, and we need to clear the air. Sloan, the floor is yours. Please, walk us through your concerns. The condescension was thick, framing my audit as a flight of fancy. I plugged my laptop into the table's projector port. The large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. Displaying my desktop, I opened a single file. Project Trunk. My concerns aren't emotional. They're mathematical, I began, my voice even and calm, resonating in the quiet room. Over the past 18 months, Rivermark has made 14 grants, totaling $6.8 million, to an entity called Cinderline Outreach. I clicked, and a flowchart appeared on the screen, a box labeled Rivermark Foundation, with an arrow pointing to a box labeled Cinderline Outreach. Cinderline has no public presence, no operational footprint, and is registered as a shell corporation. The funds, designated as charitable grants, were then funneled from Cinderline to purchase a controlling interest in a newly created special-purpose vehicle. Another click. A new box appeared, linked from Cinderline. SPV. This SPV was then used to purchase a diversified portfolio of non-Rivermark stock, effectively turning tax-deductible charitable donations into a private, untraceable investment fund. I clicked again. The final box appeared, the destination of all the arrows. The sole beneficiary of this SPV is a trust registered as the Pilgrim Family Line Trust. I let the name hang in the air. I saw a flicker of unease in the VP's eyes. They knew that name. They knew its connection to my mother. And the trustee and sole beneficiary of the Pilgrim Family Line Trust, I said, my voice dropping slightly, is Vivian Mercer. A collective intake of breath. All eyes darted to Vivian, who sat as still as a statue, her expression unchanged. Jonathan Cade cleared his throat, leaning into his microphone. "This is a gross mischaracterization of a complex financial instrument," he said, his voice smooth as oil. Mrs. Mercer, with the full support of the CEO, was exploring innovative philanthropic models. The preliminary structure you're showing was affected by a third-party software integration glitch, which created a series of erroneous reporting logs. The funds were never at risk, and the accounting errors were already in the process of being rectified. This entire investigation is based on a phantom software bug. A software bug. It was a brilliant defense. It was technical, impersonal, and impossible for most people in the room to disprove. It shifted the blame from a person to a machine. My father nodded gravely. "Thank you, Jonathan. As you can see, this is a non-issue, a clerical error magnified by an overzealous audit. Sloan, while we appreciate your diligence, perhaps next time you should consult with legal before jumping to such dramatic conclusions." He was closing the book, dismissing me. They thought they had won. "A software bug," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "That's a tidy explanation. It's clean. It's impersonal. But this wasn't an impersonal, clerical error, was it? It was a very, very personal project." I looked directly at Vivian. Her sad, compassionate mask was still perfectly in place. "You were so worried about this audit, weren't you, Vivian? You were so concerned that I might misunderstand the tangled paperwork that you felt the need to give me a very clear, very personal directive." My fingers moved on the trackpad. I closed the presentation. The screen went black for a second, and then a new image appeared. It was grainy video, illuminated by the ugly yellow light of the airport parking lot. The room was silent as they watched the scene unfold. The black sedan, the open trunk, me, and Vivian, stepping forward, smiling. Then it happened, on the massive 80-inch screen. Her hand swung up and connected with my cheek. The sound, captured in high-fidelity audio, was shockingly loud in the pristine boardroom. It was a sharp, ugly crack, a sound of raw violence that was utterly alien in this environment of polished wood and hushed tones. And then, her voice, a whisper, amplified to fill the entire room, a silken, venomous hiss. "In the office, you keep your mouth shut." I let the video play for another 5 seconds, showing my still, silent form. Then I froze the frame on Vivian's face, her smile still lingering even as her hand was recoiling from the blow. At the bottom of the screen, a line of text was clearly visible, burned into the footage. UTC 220412, GPS 34.0522 Degen, 118.2437 Deguo, Ashbourne, INTL Airport. The room was utterly, completely silent. The air had been sucked out of it. The VPs stared, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. My father's face was ashen, his mouth slightly agape. He had known about the money. He had not known about this. For the first time, he looked at Vivian with something other than adoration. He looked at her with dawning comprehension. Vivian's mask finally, irrevocably, shattered. The compassionate matriarch vanished, replaced by a woman cornered, her eyes darting, a flicker of pure, unadulterated fury in their depths. Jonathan Cade shot to his feet, his professional calm gone. This is an outrageous violation of privacy. This is inadmissible. I request a 5-minute technical recess to confer with my client. Denied, I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. I stood up, my hands resting on the table. I was no longer the defendant. I was the prosecutor. We will not be taking a recess. We will be discussing the solution. My report to the board, which you all received this morning, recommends 2 immediate actions. First, the engagement of an independent, external forensic accounting firm to conduct a full, unrestricted audit of the Mercer Foundation and all related entities. Second, the immediate and indefinite suspension of all signing and authorization privileges for Vivian Mercer, pending the results of that audit. I had laid out the terms, not for negotiation, for ratification. My father found his voice. It was strained, a desperate appeal. Sloan, enough. This is a family matter. We will deal with this privately. Families resolve these things with each other. It was his last card, the appeal to blood, the appeal to a loyalty he himself had never honored. I looked at him, down the long, polished table. I saw the CEO, the man who had built an empire, and for the first time, I saw a man who was afraid. I am not here today as your daughter, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. I am here as the chief risk officer of this corporation. You are the CEO, and she, I nodded at Vivian, is an honorary board member who has, on video, threatened a corporate officer in an attempt to suppress a financial investigation. This is not a family matter. This is a matter for the shareholders. This is a public company. The words hit him harder than the slap had hit me. He physically recoiled, as if I had struck him. I had just drawn a line, not in the sand, but in the bedrock of corporate law. I had chosen my side, and it wasn't his. The silence that followed was broken by a new voice. It was a woman's voice, calm, measured, and carrying an unshakable weight of authority. Nora Greaves, the chairwoman of the board of directors, who had been sitting silently at the far end of the table, leaned into her microphone. "Graham," she said, her eyes fixed on my father. "Sloan is correct. This is no longer a matter for internal discussion." She looked around the table, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the vice presidents. "I am calling for an immediate, emergency vote of the board members present on the 2 recommendations put forth by Ms. Mercer, all in favor of engaging an independent forensic auditor and suspending Mrs. Mercer's privileges. Please signify by saying aye." The trap had closed, and the only person left inside it was no longer me. The victory in the boardroom was a flash fire, brilliant and hot. It lasted precisely 12 hours. The counterattack came, as I should have expected, not through the boardroom doors, but through the beige, carpeted, soul-deadening hallways of human resources. At 9:04 a.m. the next morning, an email landed in my inbox. The sender was the head of HR, a man named Mark Thompson, whose primary function at Rivermark was to make my father's problems disappear. The subject line was stark: formal complaint and notice of investigation. I opened it. It was a masterpiece of weaponized bureaucracy. A formal complaint had been filed against me by a concerned member of the senior leadership team. The anonymity was a transparent farce, for creating a hostile and threatening work environment during the previous day's meeting. According to the complaint, I had exhibited aggressive and destabilizing behavior, used threatening language, and personally targeted a fellow executive with the intent to intimidate. Attached was their evidence. It was a video file. I clicked play. It was the security camera footage from the boardroom, but it had been butchered. The first 20 minutes of my presentation, the data, the ledgers, the Cinderline flowchart, were gone. The video of Vivian striking me at the airport, gone. The entire file had been clipped and edited down to a single, 30-second snippet. It showed me, standing at the table, my face a mask of cold anger. It showed Jonathan Cade, flustered, trying to speak, and it captured my voice, perfectly isolated, cutting through his protests. The only words of mine they had kept were, "This is not a family matter. This is a matter for the shareholders. This is a public company." And I cut from a different part of the meeting and stitched in, my voice saying, "Let's make this public." Stripped of all context, I looked exactly like what they claimed I was, an unstable, aggressive employee threatening to leak company secrets, shouting down our general counsel. They had taken my shield and reforged it into their sword. 10 minutes later, my desk phone rang. It was my father. His voice was not angry. It was worse. It was a performance of deep, paternal disappointment. "Sloan," he said, his voice heavy with feigned sorrow. "Mark Thompson just called me. I've seen the complaint. I've seen the video. This is not how we do things." "The video is edited," I said, my voice flat. "It's fabricated." "It's concerning." He sidestepped. "Vivian is distraught. The board is divided. This infighting, it's tearing the company apart. I can't have this. Not now." He sighed, the sound of a man bearing an impossible burden. "Sloan, I am placing you on a mandatory 2-week paid leave of absence, effective immediately. We need to let tempers cool. We need to conduct a full, impartial investigation into this complaint." There it was, the knife, wrapped in velvet. The full board vote on the forensic audit and Vivian's suspension was scheduled for tomorrow. By placing me on leave, he was suspending me. I would be barred from the building. My network access revoked. I would be silenced, unable to present my case, while he and Cade worked to dismantle my credibility. It was a brilliant, dirty move. "I understand," I said. It was the only thing I could say. "Good," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. "You just rest. Let me and the team handle this. We'll sort it out. It's for the best." I hung up. I was locked out. They had boxed me in, cut me off from the network, and were now free to spin their narrative of the hysterical daughter to the rest of the board. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a news alert from the Ashbourne Business Journal. The headline, "Mercer Family Reaffirms Commitment to Ethical Standards Amidst Internal Review." I clicked the link. It was a press release from Rivermark's PR department. It didn't mention me by name. It didn't mention Cinderline. It was a cloud of sanctimonious smoke. It quoted Vivian, in her role as honorary chair. "The Mercer family and the entire Rivermark team are, and have always been, committed to the highest standards of transparency and community engagement. We welcome any internal review that reinforces these core values and are confident the results will affirm our unwavering integrity." Unwavering integrity. She was using my own audit as a PR stunt, painting herself as a champion of the very transparency she'd tried to kill. I stood up, I took my coat, I left my laptop, my corporate phone, and my security badge on the desk. They were useless to me now. I walked out of the office, nodding to the receptionist, and took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked past the security desk, out the revolving glass doors, and into the cold midday air. They thought they had put me in a cage. They had just set me free. I didn't take a cab. I walked 12 blocks north and 3 blocks east, to the Westbridge National Bank. The branch was old, all marble and quiet reverence, a place where money felt old and secure. I went to the vault, signed the register, and was escorted into the small, sterile room. I unlocked my safe deposit box. Inside, sitting next to my mother's pearls, was the encrypted SSD. The vault, it contained everything, the original, unedited video of the airport assault, with its pristine metadata, the complete, unedited audio from the boardroom, captured by the pen in my pocket, every page of Elise Rowe's handwritten ledger, and the full trunk report, complete with the server logs showing my father, G. Mercer admin, accessing my files at 11:42 p.m. It was the entire case, from motive to conspiracy to cover-up. I put the small, cold drive in my pocket, walked out of the bank, and went to a small, anonymous coffee shop 2 blocks away. I ordered a black coffee, sat in a back booth, and opened my personal laptop. I tethered it to a burner new-gen satellite hotspot, routing my signal through 3 different countries. I logged into the encrypted, off-site portal I had established with Nora Greaves, the chairwoman of the board, for just this contingency. It was a channel that bypassed the Rivermark servers entirely. I composed a simple message. Nora, as of 10:15 a.m., I have been placed on mandatory leave by Graham Mercer to prevent me from speaking at tomorrow's vote. My character is being assassinated with fabricated evidence. This is their countermove. Attached is the complete, unredacted file, trunk full. I trust you will distribute it to the full board. I attached the single, massive encrypted file from the SSD. I hit send. The upload took 4 minutes. 4 minutes where I just watched the progress bar. My coffee growing cold. At 12:07 p.m., my encrypted email chimed. A one-word reply from Nora Greaves. Received. That was step 1. Step 2 was my own declaration of war. I logged into my personal email and opened a new draft. I addressed it to Mark Thompson in HR and CC'd the entire board of directors, including Nora and my personal attorney. Subject: formal complaint, workplace violence and retaliation. Mr. Thompson, this email serves as my formal complaint against Rivermark Freight and its executive officer, Vivian Mercer, for an act of physical battery that occurred on October 16th. This assault was a direct attempt to intimidate a corporate officer and suppress a financial investigation. Attached is the unedited, time-stamped video evidence of the assault. My subsequent suspension this morning, based on fabricated and maliciously edited video evidence, is a clear and illegal act of retaliation intended to silence a whistleblower. I am hereby notifying the board that I have been forced to take this action. I am also forwarding my complete, unredacted findings, file, trunk full, to the board for their review, as my corporate access has been unjustly revoked. I hit send. The bitter pill was swallowing them, not me. I had one last call to make. I packed my laptop and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The city noise washing over me. I dialed Elise Rowe. She picked up on the second ring. Sloan? It's done, I said, my voice low, keeping my back to the street. I'm out. They suspended me. I've just sent the full package, including your ledger, to the entire board. They know everything, which means, as of right now, you are the primary witness in a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation. I let that sink in. They know who you are, Elise. They will come for you, Cade, my father. They will try to discredit you. They will threaten you. They will offer you more money. There was a long pause on the line. I heard her take a deep, steadying breath. The woman who had been terrified, who had sold her conscience for a severance check, was gone. In her place was someone else. Let them come, Elise said, her voice clear and cold as steel. I've been keeping receipts for a year. Let them try. She hung up. I walked toward the river, the wind picking up, biting at my face. The sting was grounding. I had done it. I had fired every bullet I had. I had set the fire, and now all I could do was wait and see what would burn. I stood on the bridge, looking down at the gray, churning water of the Pilgrim River. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, assuming it was one of the VPs, or perhaps my father, raging. It was a push notification, a news alert from a legal wire service I subscribed to. My eyes scanned the text, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about Rivermark, not directly. 6:20 p.m. Notice of inquiry. The State Attorney General's office has filed a formal request for documents from the Ashbourne Port Authority, citing an anonymous tip regarding potential misuse of public-private partnership funds. Public-private partnership funds, the exact category my father and Vivian had used to lobby for new shipping lanes, the exact community development grants that had been funneled through Cinderline. It wasn't me. It wasn't the board. Someone else had been watching. Someone with the power to send a subpoena. The lights hadn't just been turned on in the boardroom. They had just been turned on in the state capitol. The State Attorney General's inquiry was a lit match dropped on a puddle of gasoline. It exploded the situation beyond the confines of the 27th floor. Nora Greaves and the board, now armed with my trunk-full package and facing a state-level investigation, could no longer treat this as an internal dispute. My suspension was rescinded in a curt 7:00 a.m. email. The board, in an unprecedented move, invoked its emergency powers to call an extraordinary shareholder meeting for the following day. The venue wasn't the corporate boardroom. It was the Riverlight Auditorium, a massive 2,000-seat theater the company usually reserved for product launches and triumphant annual reports. This was not a meeting. It was a public execution, and the only question was whose head was going to roll. I arrived 3 hours early. The place was swarming. PR teams in headsets were running frantically, checking lighting cues and testing microphones. They were in full-blown crisis mode, trying to spin a catastrophe into a moment of reaffirmation. The centerpiece of their strategy was a glossy 3-minute video package set to soaring orchestral music. It was a montage of Rivermark trucks at sunrise, smiling employees, and sickeningly, Vivian herself, cutting the ribbon at a children's center. The title card read, "Rivermark, Our Commitment to Community." I found the lead AV technician in the control booth. "I'm Sloan Mercer," I said, showing my reinstated ID. "I'm the Chief Risk Officer. I need one change to that video." The tech, wired on caffeine and stress, looked annoyed. "I'm adding one slide," I said, handing him a USB drive. "It goes at the very end, after the community title card." He glanced at the file. It was a simple, black-on-white text slide. It read, "A commitment to transparency." He shrugged. Fine. It was an innocuous, corporate jargon phrase. He added it to the sequence. He had no idea he had just armed a bomb. By 10:00 a.m., the auditorium was full. The air was electric with fear and speculation. Analysts, major investors, and the press filled the seats. My father, Vivian, and Jonathan Cade were seated in the front row. Stage left, a united front. I sat alone, front row, stage right. Nora Greaves opened the meeting with a grim, brief statement. "We are here to address serious irregularities uncovered by an internal review. The board has prepared a video message." The lights went down. The soaring music filled the room. The PR video played. A 3-minute masterpiece of emotional manipulation. The smiling children, the sunrises, Vivian's compassionate face. The music swelled to a crescendo, and the "Our Commitment to Community" slide appeared. It faded to black, and then, in the dead silence, my slide appeared, a black screen, with 4 simple white words. "A commitment to transparency." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. It was a clear, dissonant note. Before anyone could process it, the stage lights snapped on, a single, brilliant spotlight hitting center stage. Triumphant, almost presidential music began to play, and from the wings, Vivian Mercer walked out. She was magnificent. She was in a pale, ice-blue suit, her face a portrait of wronged, resilient elegance. She walked to the podium, and the applause was scattered, confused. She gripped the sides of the lectern and began her speech. It was the performance of her life. "Leadership," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "is not about the easy days. It's about the hard choices. And for women in leadership, those choices are often misunderstood. We are scrutinized. We are questioned." She spoke for 5 minutes. A beautiful, abstract soliloquy about the burdens of philanthropy, the tangled complexities of doing good, and the pain of having one's passion projects misconstrued by those who do not understand the vision. She was playing the feminist icon, the visionary, the martyr. She was painting me, without ever saying my name, as a jealous, naive girl who didn't understand the hard work of grown-ups. She finished to a smattering of polite applause. She smiled, a sad, brave smile, and turned to take her seat. "Thank you, Mrs. Mercer," Nora Greaves said, her voice like ice. "Ms. Sloan Mercer will now present the findings of her audit. Sloan, you have 10 minutes." I walked to the lectern, I placed my laptop on it and connected it to the projector. "I won't need 10 minutes," I said, my voice carrying through the silent auditorium. "And I'm not here to talk about vision. I'm here to talk about math. The PR team has already spoken about commitment. I'm here, as they promised, to provide the transparency." I didn't open a slideshow. I opened a live dashboard, a data visualization I had built. The massive screen behind me lit up. "This is the money," I said. A single node appeared. "Rivermark Foundation, 6.8 mil." "This is where it went." I clicked. A line shot across the screen to a new node. "Cinderline Outreach, Shell Corp." "And this is what it was used for." I clicked again. The Cinderline node exploded, sending lines to 3 ghost vendors: Pilgrim Strategies, Ashbourne Consulting, Riverway PR, all phantom vendors, all paid for lobbying fees. The money was laundered. "But not all of it," I said. $2 million took a different path." A new line shot from Cinderline to a new box. "It was used to purchase a controlling interest in a special purpose vehicle." I zoomed in. The name of the SPV filled the 40-foot screen, each letter a foot high. Pilgrim Family Line Trust. The name hit the room like a physical blow. This was my mother's legacy. The shareholders knew it. The press knew it. I heard a dozen people gasp. And who benefits from my mother's legacy? I clicked one last time. A scanned document filled the screen. It was the beneficiary form from Elise Rowe's ledger. The signature was clear. The beneficiary name was printed in stark black letters: Vivian Mercer. The room erupted. It wasn't a murmur, it was a roar. People were standing up, shouting. Vivian shot to her feet. "This is a fabrication, a lie. It was a software glitch. It was not a glitch," I said, my voice cutting through her panic. I hit a single key on my laptop. The auditorium's state-of-the-art sound system, the same one that had just played that soaring orchestral score, suddenly blasted a single, sharp sound. Crack. The sound of the slap was so loud, so violent, it made people jump in their seats. Then, the silence. And in that silence, Vivian's voice, a cold, venomous hiss, filled every corner of the room. "In the office, you keep your mouth shut." 10 seconds of audio. That's all it took. It was the truth, amplified. The room was in chaos. Shareholders were screaming "thief" and "resign." Nora Greaves strode to the center podium, her face a mask of cold fury. "Silence!" she bellowed. The room, slowly, quieted. In light of this sickening evidence, the board is announcing the immediate and indefinite suspension of Vivian Mercer from all duties, titles, and associations with Rivermark Freight, pending a criminal investigation. From the front row, my father leaped to his feet, his face a terrifying shade of purple. He was undone. "No!" he roared, pointing at me. "This is a betrayal, slander. You cannot believe this. This child. I cannot believe—" He never finished the sentence. As he stood there, bellowing, his shadow cast long on the screen behind him, I made one final click. The graph of the money vanished. The beneficiary form vanished. They were replaced by a single, stark line of white text on the black screen, floating just above my father's head. Server log. File. Vault 7. Trunk memo final. Docs. Accessed user ID. G. Mercer admin timestamp 23:42:17 EST. He stopped shouting. He felt the shift in the room. He felt the thousands of eyes move from his face to the screen behind him and back again. He slowly turned, and he saw it. He saw his own digital fingerprint, caught red-handed, trying to access the very file I had presented. He had been caught, in real time, in front of everyone, trying to cover his tracks. He sagged, the air leaving him, a suddenly old man in an expensive suit. I stepped back to the microphone. The auditorium was dead quiet, the silence of a tomb. I looked out. past my father, past Vivian, to the sea of faces, the investors, the employees, the people whose jobs and savings were tied to the name on the building. My father is right. This is about family, I said, my voice clear and steady. But he's mistaken about which one. I paused, letting the words land. The board of directors and the shareholders of this company are the only family I owe an explanation. I did not slam the microphone down. I placed it gently back on the lectern. The soft, definitive thud was the only sound in the room. Then, Nora Greaves said, "This meeting is adjourned." The house lights snapped on, and the chaos began. The moment after the house lights came on was not silence. It was a roar, a physical wave of sound, of shouts, of questions, of 1,000 people talking at once. It was the sound of a $7 billion company breaking apart. I saw it all as if through a lens. Vivian didn't walk off the stage. She was escorted, a hand from a panicked-looking Jonathan Cade on her elbow, shielding her as if from a physical blow. The press, a pack of wolves smelling blood, surged toward the stage, their cameras flashing like a strobe light. The rapid-fire click, 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 a sound like chattering teeth. They were a wall of light and noise between me and my former family. We didn't leave the auditorium. We were ushered into a small, sterile green room backstage. It smelled of dust and old coffee. Nora Greaves, the chairwoman, stood in the center of the room. The board members present filed in, their faces grim. No one looked at my father, who had slumped into a chair in the corner, a man suddenly hollowed out. There was no debate. There was no discussion. Nora, her voice a low, steady instrument of command, simply laid out the resolutions. It was a formal, procedural cleansing. A motion to ratify the immediate suspension of Vivian Mercer from all duties and titles, she said. A chorus of ayes, not a single nay. The sound of the gavel, a ceremonial prop brought for the meeting, was a sharp, definitive crack. A motion to engage the firm of Deloitte for a full, independent forensic audit, with unrestricted access to all corporate records. Aye. Crack. A motion to appoint Sloan Mercer as interim chief operating officer, effective immediately, to oversee the audit process and ensure operational stability during this transition. Aye. Crack. Each strike of the gavel was a nail being hammered into the coffin of my father's reign. Nora then turned her attention to the man in the corner. "Graham," she said, and her voice was not unkind, but it was unyielding. "We need your administrator credentials, all of them, and your security token, now." A corporate security officer, a man who had reported to my father for 20 years, stepped forward, his hand out. My father didn't seem to hear at first. He just stared at the floor. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, his phone, and a small USB key from his keychain. He placed them on the table. He did it all without ever once looking at me. He was a king being stripped of his crown, and he could not bear to look at the face of the one who had taken it. That, I realized, was his price. Not the money, not the power, but the shame of having his own daughter be the one to expose him. I felt nothing, not pity, not triumph, just a vast, cold emptiness. The next hour was a blur of paperwork. Lawyers from an outside firm, summoned by Nora, arrived with documents. I signed papers authorizing the audit. I signed my own temporary employment contract as COO, and then a door opened, and Nora ushered someone in. It was Elise Rowe. She looked small and overwhelmed in the chaotic green room, but her eyes found mine immediately. They were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. But she wasn't crying now. She was smiling, a wide, trembling, victorious smile. Nora put a hand on her shoulder. "Elise," she said, her voice softer than I had yet heard it. "On behalf of the board, I want to apologize for what this company put you through. We would like to formally offer you a position as lead consultant, working directly with the auditors and Ms. Mercer to help us find everything." Elise looked at me, and her smile broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "I'd be honored," she whispered. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. We just shared a look that acknowledged the war we had survived together. As I was reviewing a document with the new lawyers, my personal phone buzzed. It was an email from Mark Thompson in HR. I opened it. It was a formal letter, retracting the complaint against me. It ended with a sentence that was a masterpiece of corporate ass covering. "We apologize for any distress this may have caused, and acknowledge that the video evidence submitted was edited in a way that removed critical context." They didn't apologize for trying to destroy me. They apologized for a bad edit. I deleted the email. By late afternoon, the building was in a state of controlled chaos. My father had been escorted from the premises. Vivian was gone, a ghost who had already vanished from the corporate servers. I was in the glass-walled conference room on the 27th floor, my new temporary office, when two people from the State Attorney General's office arrived. They were all business, their faces impassive. They laid a document on the table in front of me. It was a cooperation agreement. It granted me, as a whistleblower, certain protections in exchange for my full, voluntary testimony and evidence. I read it twice. I picked up the pen they offered. My signature, clear and steady, filled the blank line. I was no longer just an auditor. I was a state's witness. The day ended as it had begun, in a blur of meetings and legal documents. As dusk settled over Ashbourne, casting long shadows from the towers across the Pilgrim River, I finally packed my briefcase. I was exhausted, but it was a clean exhaustion, the feeling of a field having been plowed after a long, hard season. As I stood, ready to leave, my phone chimed with a text message. 4 words. "Cars outside." For a single, chilling second, my blood ran cold. The memory of the airport, of the impending violence, was a physical reflex. But this message wasn't from my father's number. It was from Nora Greaves's executive assistant. I walked to the window and looked down. In the same pickup bay where my homecoming had begun, a black sedan was waiting. But it was not the same car. This one was registered to the board, not to the CEO's office. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The night was cold. As I walked toward the waiting car, the new driver, a woman I'd never seen before, opened the rear door for me. She didn't open the trunk. There was no luggage. There was no threat. I stopped for a moment. The car door held open. I raised my hand and my fingertips brushed against my cheek. The bruise was gone, the swelling long since faded, but I could still feel a ghost of the impact, a faint, phantom heat under the skin. It was no longer a wound. It was no longer just evidence. It was the closing entry in a ledger, a debt that had been paid in full. The proof of their crime had been the catalyst for my decision, and that decision had brought me to this exact moment. I got into the car. The door closed with a solid, reassuring thud. I pulled out my phone, opened a new message, and addressed it to myself. I typed 2 words. "Closed loop?" I hit send. The system was balanced. The operation was over. I stepped out of the Riverlight Auditorium's side entrance and into the night. The chaos of the meeting had dissipated, leaving behind a profound, humming silence. The wind, cold and sharp, funneled between the concrete pillars of the pickup bay, carrying the distant sound of city traffic. It was the same kind of space as the airport, the same transient, impersonal architecture, but the air felt different. It felt clean. A single black sedan was waiting at the curb, engine idling, its interior dark. The driver stood beside the front door, a silhouette against the sodium lamps. As I approached, there was a soft, electronic whir. The trunk lid lifted on its own, a smooth, silent hydraulic motion. The small interior light came on, illuminating a pristine, empty gray carpet. It was a space of potential, not a stage for an assault. There was no smiling monster waiting for me. There was no hand waiting to strike. There was only the quiet, efficient sound of a well-oiled machine opening its door for its new operator. The sound was not a threat. It was a promise of service. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was not a text. It was a secure notification from the board's portal. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Subject: EGM. Resolution 01. Adopted. Subject: EGM. Resolution YO2. Adopted. Subject: EGM Resolution 03. Adopted. The votes were in. The changes were permanent. The record was now sealed. It was done. I didn't look at the car. Instead, I lifted my gaze. High on the wall, tucked under the concrete overhang, was a small, black dome, a security camera. Its lens, a tiny, dark pupil, regarded me without judgment. It was another one of the silent, impartial witnesses that had been there all along. It had seen my arrival at the airport. It had recorded Vivian's crime. Now, it was recording this. The closing of the loop. I spoke, my voice not a whisper, but not a shout, just a statement of fact, spoken into the cold night air, for myself and for the unblinking eye of the camera. You chose the darkness, I said. I chose to turn on the lights. The driver, who had been waiting patiently, now stepped forward and opened the rear passenger door for me. She was a professional, her movements quiet and unobtrusive. "Where to, Ms. Mercer?" she asked, her voice respectful, deferential. I looked away from the camera and met her eyes. There was only one destination, one place to go after a victory, the place where the real work began. "To the office," I said. I slid onto the cool leather of the back seat. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, shutting out the noise of the city, sealing me inside the quiet, insulated space. As the car pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. I looked forward, at my own reflection in the tinted window, a pale, determined ghost against the glittering, passing lights of Ashbourne. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm so curious to know where you're all tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know where you are in the world. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts on Sloane's journey. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach even more people, show some extra support by hitting that hype button. It makes a huge difference. Thanks again for being here.